Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. So this is a really complicated area, and I'm glad that Dr. O'Neill gave us a little 101 on algorithms and how they work, and ultimately, you know, she came down to the conclusion that this is about money. You know, this is about what works, kind of along the lines of what Ambassador Kornblue just talked about, that, you know, what works is what sells more advertising, and these algorithms are at the core of that. In other words, they are determining what we want to hear as online participants and amplifying that. I will say two things that I just want to try to stipulate here at the start, and some may not agree with me, but it seemed to me, Ambassador Kornblue, in your comments in particular, you were focused on right-wing extremism as being the problem. It's not. It's everything, and I hope we can agree to that, because, again, the work that we did early on in this committee with regard to what ISIS was doing online, and in terms of recruiting and spreading violence, and in terms of what happens today even. I mean, there is, as you know, a lot of concern about these platforms not allowing what happened at the Wuhan lab, the leak, to come out, or you know, concerns about what Hunter Biden is doing or not doing being blocked, or other things that lead me to believe that, you know, whether it's Antifa on one side or whether it's white supremacy on the other side, we need to look at this as a problem that is impacting ideologies across the spectrum. So I'm just going to stipulate that because I want to get to some questions. Some of you may not agree with me on that, but I think that's really important for us not to make this a partisan exercise. Second is the First Amendment, and this is impossible. You know, how do you figure out what is speech that is peaceful expressions of points of view that we should be encouraging, and what is content that ought to be, you know, filtered in some way? And there's lots of examples of this. Recently, you know, parents at a school board meeting by, I guess it was the National School Boards Association, said these are domestic terrorists. They aren't domestic terrorists. These are parents trying to, and I think they later apologized for saying that, but parents expressing their strongly held views about their kids' education. So you got to be sure that we're not taking content which is people expressing political views that are peaceful and somehow filtering those out. Any thoughts on that as we start for any of the panelists, either with us or virtually?
I just want to agree with you. The algorithms aren't partisan. The algorithms are economically driven, as Dr. O'Neill said, and they're just trying to keep us all online. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And I think for the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, freedom of association, it's extremely important that the government not be in the business of deciding what's true and what's not true, and that instead, that's why I think some of these revelations from the whistleblower is so important, because she focuses us upstream of the content, at the mechanics of the platform, and how it's driving this content just to service itself and to service its ad revenues. And if we focus on those design elements and we focus on transparency especially, that furthers First Amendment concerns. It furthers freedom of speech and freedom of association. Transparency is such an important principle. If we let consumers know who's behind what they're seeing, what interest is it serving?
Well, and that leads me to my core question today, really. Again, just stipulating this is a hard area, and we've talked about a couple of those issues, but it seems to me that, as I said earlier in my opening statement, getting under the hood and looking into what these design elements are that you talk about, the transparency issue you talk about, is really important, because again, it's proprietary information. I understand that. These are private companies. Again, this is not an easy issue for government to be involved with, but everybody's talking about regulation right now. I mean, everybody. Facebook is talking about it. Google's talking about it. Twitter's talking about it. We're talking about it. You know, everybody has a different view of what that regulation might be, but shouldn't it be based on better data? Because we really don't know what we're trying to regulate if there is a lack of transparency as to what that design is or how these algorithms are derived. So, you know, we talked a little, again, in your testimony about this. Dr. Pursley, in particular, you talked about your thoughts on how to give access to impartial researchers to be able, I assume, to publish about what is actually behind all this. What is the content directing mechanism and how does it work? I'm intrigued by that. I don't know if that's the answer, and you mentioned that the FTC could play a role in this, Federal Trade Commission. But can you amplify that a little bit and talk about what you think could lead us to more transparency and better understanding?
Thank you for that question. So the model that I've put out there is that the FTC, working with the National Science Foundation, would vet researchers who would not have the permission of the company, but the company would have to basically develop research portals for outside independent research to study all of these societal problems that we are saying are caused by social media. The key features of this are simply that the firms have no choice in who has access to the data, and then we have some way of vetting the researchers to prevent, say, another Cambridge Analytica and the like. And so we need to have some process in place so that someone other than those who are tied to the profit-maximizing mission of the firm get access to this data. As you mentioned, it's proprietary data, but it's data about us, right? It is essentially data about everything that's happening in American politics and frankly, around the world. And so we need to figure out some way for the firms to be opened up so that outsiders can see it. My view is that they shouldn't turn the data over to a government agency, that would pose real privacy and surveillance problems. We want to make sure that there's a vetted, independent third party that's able to do this kind of research on all of these questions that have come up today, so that we can get to this answers to the questions about some of the questions that you asked earlier about the propensity on the left and the right to engage in hate speech or engage in violent content, like, as well as potential bias in the content moderation platforms and the like. Only if we have access to the data can we really answer those questions.
And otherwise, very, very hard to come up with regulation, which is what, again, everybody's talking about. I know there's different views on what that means, but it seems to me that there should be a consensus that if we're going to try to regulate this, we need to have better information as to what, what the actual design and what the intentions are and the impact is. So this hearing is helpful, I think, in that regard. I'm at the end of my time. Hopefully we'll come back for a second round if so many other questions for this team. But again, I thank you for your expertise today.